the relationship.
Well, that's Antony Blinken. Let's talk now to Professor Shirley Yu, who's Senior Visiting Fellow at the London School of Economics. Thank you for being with us. There's a lot that we heard there, even though suggestions are this didn't really achieve a great deal. It was symbolically important that Mr. Blinken met with President Xi Jinping. I wonder what you made of that meeting and whether this changes anything in that relationship.
Good afternoon. Secretary Blinken met with Chinese President Xi Jinping for 35 minutes, and that act in itself has been widely perceived to be a success. The two sides did reach 5 minor agreements. Most of them are administrative levels, including the senior level bilateral visits, and also setting up a joint works group and also a senior level guiding principles dialogue. China has so far not committed to the military crisis communications hotline, which is critical to the U.S. But if you were to look at the seating arrangement today, it is rather interesting because last week when Chinese president met with Bill Gates, the two were sitting alongside each other in a very close-up setting. But today we see a clear contrast. Xi was absolutely the center of the room. He was exhibiting this power of superiority over both sides of the Chinese and the U.S. diplomacy. And that really, given 4 decades of U.S.-China relations, has been unprecedented. So yeah. I would say in terms of the outcome, it's a mixed bag.
Yes, and the thing that is probably underlines all of this visit is that it is about politics and economics. And the economic discussion is one that will continue because whilst they may not see eye to eye on many, many issues, the one thing that they are linked by is trade, and they need that trade between the two countries last year at a record $690 billion. So despite what they may say about not working together in some areas, they are linked economically, and that is a link that they cannot afford to do without.
Absolutely. Last year was a record trade year for China-U.S. bilateral trade, and I think Secretary Blinken today repeatedly expressed that in the press conference. However, if we were to look at 2023's bilateral trade, China's export to the United States declined by over 20% in the first 4 months of the year. So the deceleration of U.S.-China trade is indeed happening. However, just days before Secretary Blinken's visit to China, the White House contemplated revoking the minimus rule that applies to e-commerce companies that sell directly to U.S. consumers at for goods at below $800 tariff-free. And so now by revoking the de minimis act, the Chinese e-commerce giants will be hit very hard, particularly Shein and Temu, which is a part of Chinese e-commerce giant Pinduoduo. So given this current rhetoric, trade has become part of the broadened U.S. national security narrative. And you might wonder why selling T-shirts to the U.S. affects U.S. national security. Well, if it affects U.S. jobs market, then it is considered a part of national security. And so I think from DC's perspective, rather than lifting some of the tariffs on Chinese trade, the restrictive trade policies will continue to dominate, and the protective trade thinking will continue to prevail in the DC circuit.
Yes, and that's the point, isn't it? Trade has been politicised in this relationship. And I wonder, therefore, we heard the words of Antony Blinken saying that the US wants to de-risk and diversify. That's the idea of not being so reliant on China for trade. But he says they do not want to decouple from China entirely. I wonder what would be perceived as a maybe safe or acceptable level of trade with China.
That is rather interesting. Even Secretary Blinken mentioned that was actually an idea that was raised at the G7 meeting by the European counterparts. And so today, in setting the agenda for the two-day meeting, Secretary Blinken mentioned he's in China to manage strategic miscalculation. So from the Chinese perspective, there is a firm belief that the U.S. is seeking to economically contain China, militarily encircle China, and technologically suppress China. So I think that idea has been deeply rooted. And so this clarification that the U.S. seeks to de-risk and diversify rather than decoupling from China, I think it's significant. And the other part of a major clarification on the strategic miscalculation by Secretary Blinken is that the U.S. does not seek to unilaterally change the status quo on Taiwan, meaning the U.S. Does not support Taiwan independence. And I think this really touches on the core of the core Chinese concerns there.
Shirley, we're grateful for your insight. Thank you. That's Shirley Yu there at the London School of Economics.